share questions and that. I always say to people, there aren't any stupid questions. I can give a lot of stupid answers, but there aren't any stupid questions. So quite often I've found that somebody will ask a question that seems obvious, and it can sometimes take me several weeks to come up with a reasonable answer for it. So, and if you're thinking, I'm not sure about this, then actually chances are somebody else is. And even the simplest idea, but even if you've been doing it for years and you're, well, what is happening there? It's always worth asking. So start in our usual way, nice and easy and gently, excuse me, giving yourself plenty of time to settle in, to focus your attention. And just to sort of touch something that I think is really important in Tai Chi, the sense of a stillness, a quietness, a space, various ways that we could describe it. It really lies at the heart of the practice. And I think it's one of those things which we often lack in our culture. I mean, it was interesting that, through the lockdown and so on and so forth, there was a lot of stuff being said about, oh, isn't it quiet? We don't always realise how busy we get. And I think it's something which arts like Tai Chi have to offer, and because to some extent explains their popularity these days. Because we sort of lack that space in our culture. And I think it's one of the things that attracts people to the art. People say it's just relaxing watching it, sort of thing, because it does have that quality of that. And it comes through the focusing of our attention. So this is where Tai Chi is very much a moving meditation. And one of the reasons for the slight obsession we have in Tai Chi with posture and so on is that it's actually something that we focus our attention on from moment to moment. And when we do that, this is not a rejection of the details and ups and downs and the things we have to deal with in our life, but it's a stepping back from it. One of my favorite images came from a meditation teacher many years ago, and he was referring to sitting meditation, but I think it works really well with Tai Chi, where he said it's like sitting on a riverbank, and when you sit on a riverbank, the river flows past you. You're not trying to analyze the river, you're not trying to divert or stop the river, and the river's like your thoughts. So you're not trying to stop your thoughts or anything, you're just sitting back from them for a little while. And every now and then we fall into the river. Where we think, oh yeah, it's nearly lunchtime, what shall I have for lunch? And, or shall I go shopping? Or shall I do this? Or I've got that in the fridge. And suddenly you're planning, no, I think I'll go shopping on Wednesday, maybe I'll go to this. And so the stream of thoughts has carried you away. And when you realize that, just bring your attention back. So everything that we do, from the simplest movement to the most complicated, could be seen as a way of constructing that riverbank for ourselves, bringing ourselves back to that. A very simple but a very beneficial process. So as much as possible, we get the posture right, but we have to recognize that that takes a long time and should be done very gently. But we still make the effort. We still go through the motions. Check your feet. Remember, hip width apart. You'll see that mine angle out slightly. It can be judged from here or here or here. I prefer the slightly wider stance. And your weight slightly forwards in your feet. And sometimes we refer to a particular point in the foot. just behind the ball of the foot, on the midline of the foot, there's an acupuncture point called the bubbling well, which is a delightful name, I think. And the bubbling well is sort of the plug hole for the weight. It's the thing that we come to focus in. You let your hips drop back. There's a number of, in acupuncture, there's 300 odd points in the body. We sometimes refer to a few of them in Tai Chi. You don't have to buy into that side of things if you're not interested in that. I mean, I am, but it's not crucial. A friend of mine once said, and this is an idea that I've used in lots of contexts, that you can think of the acupoints, Zubo as they're sometimes referred to, as being like signposts on a journey or landmarks when you're sort of out for a walk or something like that. So it's a further refinement of that focusing of attention. You could just think of your weight slightly forwards, of 70% of your weight in the front half of your feet, and so on. The hips dropping back, it's just a very gentle process at the start. We're not looking for deep postures at this point. And what we get is a sort of configuration where your knees are roughly over the balls of your feet, your hips are roughly over your heels, and a feeling of your pelvis hanging down. So I've used this image of a bucket in a well sometimes. A friend of mine sometimes says it's like a teddy bear. You know how teddy bears' legs kind of go up, seem to go further up the side of their body than they ought to. And so there's that sense of dropping down. And then as you move, of course, you're not going to keep that exact posture, because as I turn here, if I do nothing, my shoulder's above my head, hopefully. And then when I turn, well, it's no longer above my hip, but it's important, that line down there, if you imagine it like an elastic band, you get to there and then, and what you want to be able to do is to feel the elastic band stretch out, but not tighten. Again, I've used different images at times with your guy ropes of a tent, or the strings of a guitar or a violin. These, pick the images that actually help you to bring yourself into your body. Your arms at the start, very loose, just flopping around your body. But then when you're ready, you can apply this image of moving through water, or maybe even just gently pulling on that elastic band. Some ways of thinking of it. So there's a little bit of resistance that you encourage your body to move with, and it gradually begins to change in its movement, more connected and stronger quality. And then raise your arms. And shake. So this basic posture is sometimes referred to as the Wu Ji posture. Wu Ji would mean original. In Chinese sort of philosophy and cosmology, this symbol here, just get a bit closer, what we refer to as the yin yang symbol, is the Tai Chi symbol, the symbol of a concept. In that sort of line of thinking, before we get the divided circle, we get an empty circle, and that's the Wu Ji. So this is the start of it before it divides, before there's movement there. And the feeling of it, the quality of it, is this central equilibrium, a sense, well, if you like, Zhongding is the term, and for me, that encapsulates all these ideas and qualities that I go on about. And we want to try and keep that as we begin to move. We're no longer going to be physically exactly in that posture because, as I said, the shoulders are moving and so on and so forth, but the feel should remain the same. So just rocking your weight forwards and backwards. If it helps you to think of that point, the bubbling well. Anybody who's a student of these things, it's kidney 1. And as you move forwards and backwards, even if you're not comfortable with your weight that far forwards at the moment, that's fine. But feel as though you're sort of connected to it. Almost as though, going back to the riverbank analogy, that could be your link to the riverbank, or like a boat when it's tied up to a post or a buoy in the water. It moves away, but you come back to it. So central equilibrium is, like the riverbank, something that we get familiar with and come back to. Bring your hands out in front of you. Notice any changes in your movement as you bring your arms into play, because they quite often just automatically override all the other parts of the body. If that's happened, then you just bring your attention back. And then this time, letting your weight settle, sinking down, hips dropping back, remember, not knees going forwards, and pushing up. And looking every now and then to get that sort of sense of dropping in your center of gravity just a little bit more. Won't happen every time. And it happens. We focus on the movements, the posture, doing things correctly, rather than forcing the weight down. And a smooth movement again. Imagine the resistance of water, or sometimes talked about the ball being heavier. You see, the images are having an effect. One more time. And then we change. I think one of the reasons I like the riverbank analogy and the idea of coming back to the riverbank so much is that actually this is what we do in Tai Chi. It's built in to the rhythm of the Tai Chi. We extend, we contract, we push out, we draw in. Yang, yin in very generic terms. And it's almost like there's an inherent acknowledgement that we're never going to just stay in that central equilibrium. Life isn't that straightforward. It might even be quite dull if it was. So eventually we're going to lose that connection, like the boat, sort of pulling on the rope. But provided the rope is there, we'll get drawn back. And that coming back, I think, is one of the great gifts of the art. And then heart in the clouds. So if you do lose that focus of your attention, or when you lose that focus of attention, don't see it as a failure, see it as an opportunity to work out how you can regain it. And I think that's important. Everybody I've ever sort of trained with of any value would acknowledge that this is what we do. We lose that focus, we come back to it. And being able to bring yourself back is a great skill, great tool to have. One more time. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Notice with this one whether you're actually speeding up. Try and make a particular point of not starting on one side before you've fully finished on the other. And even then, don't make it an abrupt change. It's not left, right, but rather your hand comes down, your arm lengthens, your fingers open, and your attention scans across like a camera, slowly panning across the landscape. There's not a stop in the movement, but it's a kind of slowing down. One more on each side. And then change to pushing in 4 directions. So as you turn, in particular as you turn, but really all the time, but it's very obvious, I think, with this one. Imagine, for instance, you're wearing one of these sort of very sort of body-fitting lycra tops that you see people having in gyms and things like that. And what would happen is there would be certain lines of stretching. Well, stretching is probably the wrong term, extension. And you would feel the pull. And imagine that you've got something like that inside your body. And see if you can feel the same thing. You do have that inside your body. It's called the fascia, sometimes referred to as the muscle skin. So a layer beneath the skin, between the skin and the organs, and oversimplifying really. And it used to be thought to be inert, just not much use really. But discoveries have suggested it has elastic properties. So this is part of the extension and contraction mechanism potentially. Some people also say that they've discovered that it has certain conductive qualities as well, leading some people to conjecture that the meridian system and the acupoints that they talk about in Chinese medicine actually work within the fascial layer. In Tai Chi, we just, it's another physical element that we try and bring into the movement rather than just working with major muscle groups. It's part of the whole, but a significant part of the whole. So when one part of your body is in motion, your whole body is in motion. And those connections work in various ways. The fascial layer, the skeleton, with the linking up of muscle, bone, tendon, ligament, through the movement itself. And then the hands drop down and circling palms. You can begin to feel and observe how each movement creates and is part of a pattern within your body. Pathways often overlapping and intersecting. But nevertheless, each exercise will have a certain uniqueness about it. And then adding the turn. And switch sides. And adding the turn. So in Tai Chi, we always try and work with the whole thing. This makes it a lovely complement to those practices and exercises that help us to focus on particular aspects of the body. Now, changing to rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. The effect on our minds is also interesting. A sense of our whole body moving in one unit can have a very calming and very healing effect on the mind. we've all had those mornings where we might use the phrase, I feel all over the place today. It actually helps to put you back together. I sometimes borrow a phrase from modern computing and say that Tai Chi helps us to defragment, for those of you who use such terms. One more time. And then come back to standing. So that process of defragmentation can actually be a very positive thing in terms of our view of our body. And Tai Chi is fascinating, I think, like that. We have a tradition in Tai Chi, the martial side of Tai Chi, of trying to push each other over. It sounds a bit daft, really, doesn't it? But we do that nevertheless. One of my teachers, one of my main teachers, has a really interesting trick, and I've never managed to reproduce it properly. But if I allow him, and when we're working together, if he gets his hand there or there, he has a way of pressing in and twisting that makes my knee collapse. It's very interesting. Excuse me. If I get my little friend here, you've probably all seen these sort of things. You get them, you push on one end and it collapses. Oh, there he goes, and so on and so forth. It feels a bit like that. It feels as though somebody's pushed a button somewhere, and everything in part of my body has collapsed. And I think it's tempting to say, well, it's because of this or that. But as a holistic viewpoint, maybe we shouldn't be thinking, well, it's this or that or the other, but rather what happens when we can work with the whole thing rather than bits of it. So again, an awareness of posture is a really important part of that, because without good posture, it's very hard to integrate. It's like if you've got a bike with a buckled wheel, it doesn't work properly. We also need to think about the movement. So transferring your weight from side to side. And we want the main impetus, the main drive for that to come from our feet. And this requires usually a change in perception. It's why we put so much time and effort into doing movements like this, when everybody thinks of Tai Chi as being movements like this, where re-evaluating how we actually move, and some of that re-evaluation is a recognition of the significance of our feet and our legs and the transfer of the weight. This is very small. You probably can't see very easily what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do, I'll go back a bit. I'm going to take a wider stance. So I'm not suggesting you do this, but now maybe you can see, so that leg's got a bit straighter, the knee's still a bit bent. I'm going to push with that leg, and that pushes me across. Now I'm going to push with that leg, pushes me across. If I move my hip first, oops, or if I move my shoulder first, or my chest first, or whatever, I'm kind of instantly out of line. It's like if you've got a pile of books or a pile of bricks or some wood or something stacked up, and you decide you want to move it a bit. If you push on the top, it just collapses. If you push on the bottom, the whole lot will move. And again, it's very easy to lose that focus of attention. And particularly when we come to the arms, sometimes the movements can be quite complex with our arms. So this gets hardwired into our system. Hold your hands in front of you, just now. Actually, no, have them at your side. We're going to try something. We're going to build up into a movement that you're familiar with, but we're going to take a slightly different pathway here. What I want you to do is to think back to Dragon Plucks the Stars in the Sky. And as you move across, push the arm up on that side. Come back to the middle a little bit. The arms will actually cross over at this point. I'm doing this so that you can play with this idea with a familiar movement and a simple movement. You push from this leg and it pushes your weight across, but it also pushes your arm up. It isn't normally how we would do this exercise, but it's not a bad viewpoint of this exercise. But this is not what we're trying to do. Now I want you to change this slightly. Rather than plucking, I just want you to lift up. Notice that my hand is in front of the shoulder, turns palm down. Again, my hand is in front of my shoulder, the hands turn. From the side, at the moment, my hands are fairly close to the body. I'm not trying to do anything clever with them. This leg pushes the hand up on the same side. Probably worked out where we're going, so we'll carry on. I go across, I raise this heel and I turn my body. Turn the hands, I come back to the middle, I raise the opposite heel and I turn my body. And finally, as the arm comes up, it also extends out, like a branch growing out of a tree. So there's a lengthening through my arm, not a pulling out of my shoulder. And yes, hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Be careful not to go too far. And too far would be the point at which that feeling of pulling and extension tightens up. Pulling your shoulder out or pulling your hip out or something like that. If you decide that that's not far enough, don't go into a stretch, because that is not the idea in these exercises. Let's say you get to here, it's like, well, that's not very far, I want to go further. Sink down more in this hip, create more space in the center of the body, turn a little bit more. And then change to cow gazes at the moon. Your arms coming up a little bit more. And with this one, you look between your hands and you gaze into the mid-distance. Imagine you were standing on a hill or by the sea and just looking out a little bit. That's the extension, contraction comes as we come in. This is the return to the riverbank here, back to the center, through, and then out again. So we're not stuck in one aspect or another. And then come back, turn your hands palm in, about shoulder width apart. Just turning from side to side. And again, recognize that there's often a temptation here to just move the arms. But the angle between the top of your arm, where it meets your shoulder, and your chest remains more or less the same. Nothing is sort of rigid, but it's not this to here, it's this to here. And we turn that into the circular movement. Again, remember the basic posture of sinking down. And I mean, if it suits you, there's no reason why you shouldn't. You can go into a much deeper posture when you do this, and that's quite interesting to do. But remember, if you're in the deeper posture, sooner or later, the muscles are going to get fatigued, and they'll stiffen up. So you'll need to come up a little bit or shake them out, and then back the other way. One more time. And just stand once again in this position of central equilibrium. Just remind yourself how it feels. Literally have to touch base. That way of building up, hitting the ball in front of the shoulder, is actually a process that works in every single movement that we do. And that can be quite hard. I mean, there's something you say, because sometimes I think, well, how does that work with there? It's an internalized feeling. The phrase that we often use in Tai Chi is that the movement is rooted in the feet, released through the legs, controlled by the center of the body, and expressed through the arms. And remember, the actual posture that we take, the Wu Chi posture, which is at the heart of everything, as we've seen, involves a drop. And you imagine if you were in water, and if you're in water, and I'm not a great swimmer, I get nervous in water, I have to remind myself not to sort of try and hold on, because there's nothing to hold on to. And as soon as I remind myself of doing that, and I'm able to do it, when I can do this, I can feel the push up in the water, the buoyancy of the water. And in the same way, as soon as we do this, there's a feeling of buoyancy, I suppose you could call it. Lots of ways you could describe it. And that's the rooted in the feet. So that gives us the two fundamental movements, which is the downward movement, which is allowing gravity to pull you down, to pull your hips down, and so on and so forth. And that resilience of the body, yeah, the springiness of your legs, the ground beneath your feet, neutralizing that movement downwards. If that didn't happen, then we would just collapse downwards. Or if you're standing on soft mud, doesn't matter how much you root down, it doesn't matter how much you hold your head up, you could strain and strain and strain in mud to hold your head up, you're still going to sink down in the mud. So it's both internal and external in that response. 1 foot forwards. So from here, once again, remembering to move your body by using the legs. In the first instance, we think of the upper body being quite passive, just sitting on the hips. Then again, we think about being in water at shoulder height, perhaps, and over a period of time, our body starts to believe the image and starts to move as though there were that resistance there. What can be quite interesting, it's a bit blustery in Cambridge today. So, you know, if it's like that where you are, if it's not raining, go out in the wind. Try doing this exercise facing into the wind, and then turn around and have the wind behind you. And you'll start to recognize these small changes again in your body, in what we think of as our upper body, that are very much part of the movement. And becoming aware of those connections helps us to make a link between what's happening in our feet, our legs, and what's happening in our arms and our hands. It's quite a small movement to be at this point, because you can only go so far before everything overextends. So again, another thing we often do in Tai Chi is we think in terms of the percentage of the weight. When we go forwards, have 60% of our weight in the front foot, up to 60%. When we go back, it's up to 70%. There's some debate about that, as always, in the Tai Chi world. Some people say it's a bit more or a bit less. But the important thing is to have that sense of when your leg has filled up, not to go any further. But what we can do, what I quite like to do with people, myself, is I get to 70% here, and as I raise my toes, I slip down and back and just a little bit more, maybe get to 75%, and so on. So we start this process of beginning to get a little bit more weight flowing down through each leg until we get to a point where really, ideally, the only weight remaining in what we would refer to as the empty leg in Tai Chi is the weight of the leg itself, perhaps even less than that. And that's when you can take the step. So it shouldn't take a great deal of effort. It will take some effort, of course. But in the first instance, it's quite a light movement. But again, we can work with that. And if we're looking to condition the mechanism that moves the leg for us, then rather than sort of using weights or something like that, it's more subtle than that for us. Imagine, for instance, that your foot is stuck in mud. And what you want to be able to do is to pull the leg out of the mud without throwing your upper body offline. I'm sure this is a familiar image to most of you. Walk across a muddy field, you get stuck in the mud. You don't want to lean out because you'll just fall in the mud. So we maintain that central equilibrium really in the majority of the body while we're taking the step. Check out. Have your other foot forwards. It's very common to find that we're better at doing this one way round than another. We all have differences between one side of the body and another. But it isn't always what we think in the first instance, or at least there are layers of, I suppose, awareness that we might want to engage in. One way to work with that is to, if it's noticeable, one way around is better, look at what you're doing on that side. So try and work out what you're not doing the other way around. Or perhaps that you're adding. And raising your toes and your heel. Sinking down. Stephanie. Shake out. A few years ago, I was thinking about in the forms that I do when I go to kick slowly on my left leg. It often feels a bit more wobbly than when I'm in on my right leg. So I decided to do something about this. Thought it was probably need to do something about the left leg, holding my weight and so on and so forth. And then one day I went to do this and I realized, and I'll exaggerate, but I was doing this. I was lifting this hip to lift the leg. I thought, well, no wonder I'm falling over because the first thing I do when I go to lift my leg is I throw my body offline. Whereas on the other side, I wasn't doing that, and I realised it wasn't necessarily to do with the leg I was standing on. It was just this habit of sort of lifting the leg in a particular way. So there's a whole journey of discovery when we start to become aware of what's happening in our body. It's an ongoing thing. I'm nowhere near an end point, and as far as I know, there isn't one. It's just this ongoing process, like the river flowing, I suppose. So, have your right, actually have any foot forwards. We won't think about left and right for the moment. Have your hands down by your sides and fisherman casting net. And there's always a great exercise this for discovering how too much attention or the wrong type of attention to our arms can actually throw everything out. Imagine you're standing on the edge of a cliff and you're throwing something out. There's a big drop right in front of you where your toes are. You really don't want to do this because you don't want to fall over. And if that means that your arms are moving less, that's almost inevitable. But again, in time, you'll get a lot of that movement back because you'll become more aware of those pathways, those processes within your body with each movement. For instance, something that I realized with this exercise at one point was that when I go forwards here, my hand is slightly behind, and that causes an opening here in front of the shoulder. And as that closes, it helps to bring the arm through, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot more going on than I discovered. And we're going to change to pushing away, pushing the boat, without losing that flow and alignment, just bringing your hands in, almost like you're just squeezing the movement in a little bit by bringing your elbows in. Giving you that stronger quality as you press forwards. One more time. And then on the other side, fisherman casting. and then pushing a wave. One more time. So, rooted in the feet, released through our legs, controlled in the center of the body, expressed through the arm. We saw how that worked when we went into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder in the way we did this morning. We're going to apply that to the exercise Wind Blows the Willows, and we'll move into a little bit of stepping with that as well. So we'll start with Fisherman Castanet, and then basically the thing to think about is when you're doing Fisherman Castanet, the transition into Wind Blows the Willows is very simple. I go back, all I do is I add the turn. I don't do anything different with my arms because the very act of turning will swing my arms out. So here, the arms rise and fall, rise a little bit and fall, and then I turn and they rise and they fall and they rise and they fall. I don't need to add anything to it. So have your left foot forwards. Make sure I'm in view. So just a couple of rounds of Fisherman Castanet to remind you of that. And then when you sink back, I'm going to ask you to turn to your left. That's that way. You could do it either way, but try and do it this way at the moment. Go forward, settle into your front foot. Now, if you're comfortable with this, we can add the stepping. If you'd rather not do the stepping, that's fine. So you can build this up in your own time. You start by raising the toes and your heel. And then stepping in. And I like to start with just the half step. And again, you can stay with this if it suits you better. But then from here, you can step back. My feet will probably disappear. Probably my head will disappear as well. I'll just do a couple of steps. And then step forward with toes, left foot, right arm. This is moving into an exercise we call dragonfly skims the water. And then bring it. And then on the other side, Fisherman Castanet. Beginning to raise your toes and your heel as you turn. It suits you to do that because you sometimes find that the turn itself helps you to move your foot. If that doesn't work for you, then just do the turning. You might be able to feel that connection from your hip down to your foot. Don't rush this. You don't have to do it all today. But stepping in if it suits you. Don't worry about this arm. This arm's getting squashed against the wall. So. And then again, when you're ready, take the rest of the step. Step forwards. Dragonfly skims the water. And quite tricky, that one. Dragonfly skims the water is perhaps as close as we get to the kind of movements that we do in a Tai Chi form, or just as close as we get in this session. But I want to just think back a little bit to think about how we got there, because we started off very simple, bringing your attention in to your body, thinking about your feet, thinking about your equilibrium. So the process is one that is not just the body, but is also the mind as well when we do that. Now, just rubbing your hands together and tapping over your face. Your head and neck down to one shoulder and your arm. The other side. Onto your back. Around your hips. And your legs. Nice and light on your belly. Onto the upper part. So, embrace tiger, return to the mountain. Or, again, think back to the start of the class. It could be returning to the riverbank. Your hips sink down. Pushing up. Extending and contract. One more round. And lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. So if you have any questions, do as I say, feel free to ask. But other than that, see you soon, I hope.